Khufu had survived 12 years alone on a deserted island, but nothing could have prepared him for what he found when he washed ashore on Kayana, an island of 300 women, each carrying the same haunted look in their eyes. Under the scorching sun, a lone figure drifted on the vast ocean, his weathered raft barely keeping him afloat. Khufu lay motionless, his consciousness fading as seagulls circled overhead, their hungry cries piercing the salty air. Just when death seemed certain, he heard voices cutting through his delirium, women's voices, filled with excitement and disbelief. "It's a man. It's really a man!" The exclamations grew louder as 3 women from Kayana Island swam toward his failing raft. Their strong arms drove away the circling birds and pulled him toward the shore, where hundreds of beautiful women had gathered, their faces a mixture of concern and wonder. For 7 long years the women of Kayana had lived without men, their prayers seemingly unanswered until now. They brought Khufu to the village medicine woman, who tended to his wounds with gentle hands and ancient remedies. The women took turns watching over him, their whispered prayers filling the night air as they hoped this stranger would survive. On the 3rd morning, Khufu opened his eyes to a sight that reminded him of his mother's loving face, a room full of caring women, their eyes bright with joy at his recovery. "Am I dead?" he asked softly, drawing gentle laughter from those nearest to him. "Not at all," good sir, one responded, her voice warm with relief. "You are a miracle to our island, and our prayers have been answered." Confusion crossed Khufu's face as he took in his surroundings. Standing at the doorway of the hut, he gazed out at the gathered crowd, hundreds of women, but not a single man or child in sight. When he questioned this strange circumstance, the island's leader, Nana, stepped forward with an explanation that seemed too rehearsed. Their husbands were away on a trading journey, expected to return by month's end. The women showered Khufu with attention and gifts, particularly food from their bountiful island. "You'll have to eat a lot," Nana told him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The island has blessed us with plenty, and since you're the only man around, you're in luck." For a week, Khufu basked in their hospitality, but something felt amiss. The women's joy seemed tinged with desperation, their generosity masking a deeper pain. As he regained his strength, he began to spend more time with Nana and the others, slowly earning their trust. When he finally felt safe enough to share his own story, he had no idea that his tale of survival would pale in comparison to the dark secret these women harbored, a secret involving mermaid demons, enslaved husbands, and a curse that had haunted their island for 7 long years. But for now, he was simply a miracle, a man who had drifted from the sea into their lives, bringing with him a hope they had almost forgotten existed. When Khufu gathered the women of Kayana to share his story, his voice carried the weight of years spent in solitude. "I was only 6. He began, his eyes distant with memories, "when the storm took our ship. The waves rose like mountains, and lightning split the sky. In the chaos, only my mother and I survived, clinging to a piece of driftwood that carried us to a deserted island." His audience leaned forward, their faces reflecting the pain in his words. "The island," he explained, "was nothing but trees, grass, and unyielding rock. No people, no settlements, just the endless sound of waves against the shore." But his mother, determined to keep them alive, transformed their prison into a school of survival. "She was extraordinary," Khufu continued, his voice softening with love and loss. "Every day she taught me something new. She showed me which plants could feed us and which would kill. We caught small fish in the shallows, and she taught me to hold my breath underwater." His chest swelled with pride. "Eventually I could stay under for 30 minutes, long enough to hunt the deeper waters where bigger fish swam." The women listened, spellbound, as he described how his mother had prepared him for a life he might have to face alone. It was as if she had known her time was limited, rushing to pour all her knowledge into her young son before fate could separate them. When Khufu reached the part about his mother's illness, his voice cracked. "I was 12 when she fell sick. 2 months later she was gone." Several women wiped tears from their eyes as he described burying her on the far side of the island, marking her grave with shells and smooth stones from the beach. The next decade passed in a blur of solitude. Khufu grew from a boy into a man, with only the seabirds and fish for company. "The isolation becomes normal after a while," he explained. "You talk to yourself, to the trees, to the stars. You become part of the island itself." But beneath that acceptance, a desperate loneliness grew. I thought about ending it all, he admitted quietly. Several times I stood at the cliff's edge, wondering if the peace of the depths would be better than the silence above, but each time, something held him back, perhaps his mother's voice in his memory, urging him to survive. Finally, after 10 years alone, Khufu decided it was time to leave. Using skills his mother had taught him, he cut down trees and fashioned a raft, binding it together with vines and hope. I knew I might die at sea, he said, but staying meant dying slowly, day by day. He set sail with nothing but the clothes on his back and his mother's teachings in his heart. For days he drifted, the sun burning his skin, thirst parching his throat, until exhaustion overcame him. That's when you found me, he concluded, looking at the women of Kayana. And for the first time since my mother died, I felt like I might have found a home. Kayana Island rose from the African waters like a secret paradise, its lush greenery and pristine beaches hiding a peculiar truth. Where most coastal villages buzzed with the voices of men hauling in fishing nets or children playing in the surf, Kayana held a different energy, the presence of 300 women, and not a single man among them. The village itself was a testament to female ingenuity. Neat rows of thatched huts lined the shore, their walls decorated with intricate patterns woven from dried palm leaves. Smoke rose from cooking fires where women prepared meals from the island's abundant resources. Gardens flourished under careful tending, and the sound of looms clicking and women singing filled the air. When Khufu first walked through the village, leaning against the doorframe of his recovery hut, his eyes widened at the sight. Everywhere he looked, women moved with purpose, some carrying water jugs on their heads, others mending fishing nets, and still more tending to the daily tasks that kept the community alive. But the absence of male voices, of men's laughter, of boys running through the paths, struck him as profoundly wrong. Where are all the men amongst you, he asked, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Why so many women and no men or children? The women exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them, before Nana stepped forward, her bearing regal despite the flash of something. Was it fear in her eyes? I am Nana, she declared, the leader of Kayana Island. Her voice carried authority, but Khufu noticed how her fingers twisted the fabric of her dress as she spoke. Our husbands are very much all right, I assure you. They have only gone for a trading journey, which has taken quite a while. She forced a smile. Though we expect them before the end of the month. The other women nodded in agreement, but Khufu saw the strain in their expressions, the way some bit their lips or looked away. Young women who should have been newly married stood alone. Middle-aged women who should have had children running at their feet stayed childless, and older women who should have been surrounded by grandchildren remained solitary. Still weak from his ordeal at sea, Khufu retreated to his hut, his mind turning over the strange circumstances. The women loaded him with gifts, fruits, meats, and delicacies from their bountiful island. Sorry, Mr. Khufu, Nana said with a forced lightness in her voice. You'll have to eat a whole lot of food. The island has really blessed us with plenty, but since you are the only man around, you're in luck. But luck had nothing to do with it, Khufu suspected. As he watched the women go about their daily tasks, he saw beneath their cheerful facade to something darker, a desperation in their generosity, a hunger in their eyes that spoke not of physical need, but of a deeper longing. Something had happened to the men of Kayana Island, something the women weren't ready to reveal. As night fell over Kayana Island, the women finally shared their dark secret with Khufu. They gathered around a dimming fire, shadows dancing across their faces as Nana began the tale that had haunted them for 12 years. We were once a complete village, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Families, children, laughter, everything you'd expect. Then they came. Her hands trembled as she stoked the fire. 7 of them, rising from the sea like dreams made flesh. Beautiful beyond description, with eyes that glowed like pearls in moonlight. We thought they were a blessing from the gods. The other women drew closer together, seeking comfort in their proximity as Nana continued. They appeared during our harvest festival. All our people were celebrating by the shore, men, women, children. The mermaids began to sing. Her voice cracked. It wasn't just music, it was power, pure and terrible. We watched, helpless, as our men's eyes glazed over. 250 of them, including our sons old enough to walk, simply turned and walked into the sea. An elderly woman picked up the story, her weathered face lined with grief. Some of us tried to hold them back. We grabbed their arms, pleaded with them, but it was like they couldn't hear us. They just kept walking deeper and deeper until the waves swallowed them whole. The worst part, another woman added, was the silence. No screams, no struggle, just the sound of water and that haunting song. 5 years later, the mermaids returned. The remaining men of Kayana, those who had been away trading during the first attack, tried to fight back. They had prepared with charms and weapons, but the mermaids' magic proved too powerful. Once again, the women watched their men march into the depths, leaving them alone with their grief and unanswered questions. One man did return, Nana said, her eyes distant. My husband Kente, he surfaced near the shore one morning, half drowned and barely conscious. What he told us, she paused, fighting back tears. The men were kept in an underwater kingdom, enslaved by the mermaid spirits. They were forced to work to serve their every whim. The mermaids fed on their life force, draining them slowly until nothing remained. Kente had died 3 days after his return, his body withered as if decades had passed instead of years. But before he closed his eyes for the last time, he warned them the mermaids wouldn't stop until they had taken every man who set foot on Kayana's shores. Now you understand, Nana said to Kufu, her eyes meeting his in the firelight. Why we were so afraid when we found you, why we tried to hide the truth. We've watched everyone we loved walk into those waves. Our husbands, our sons, our brothers, all gone. She reached for his hand. And now you're here, and we fear they'll come for you too. Dawn had barely touched Kayana's shores when the screaming began. Kufu woke to chaos, his door guarded by 3 trembling women. Please, Kufu, stay down, they begged. It's for your own good, but through the gaps in the hut's walls, he could see what caused their terror. 7 women of otherworldly beauty emerged from the ocean, water cascading off their forms like liquid silver. They didn't walk so much as glide across the sand, their movements too graceful to be human. The village women formed a protective line, with Nana at their center, facing the intruders. What do you come here to do? Nana's voice carried across the beach, stronger than her trembling hands suggested. The leader of the 7 smiled, a predator's grin that sent chills through the watching villagers. We smell the presence of a man here. Bring him to us immediately. Nana stood her ground. You have taken our men for the past 7 years. We don't know what you speak of. Please leave us in peace. The mermaid leader's laughter echoed like breaking glass. With a slight nod to one of her companions, the battle began. The chosen mermaid leapt into the air, an impossible jump that carried her directly to Kufu's hut. Her landing shook the ground, cracking the earth beneath her feet. Inside the hut, Kufu watched in horror as one wave of the mermaid's hand sent a blast of invisible force that cut down 2 of his guards. His survival instincts kicked in, and he grabbed a fallen spear. Without hesitation, he drove it through the mermaid's chest, her surprised gasp more animal than human. Outside, the battle had erupted in full force. 6 village women already lay motionless on the sand. Rage filled Kufu's heart as he charged toward the fighting, his spear finding another mermaid's flesh. Her scream of pain pierced the air like a physical thing. The mermaid leader's eyes widened in recognition. A deathbringer, she hissed, her beautiful facade flickering to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath. She signaled to her remaining companions, and they retreated to the waves in graceful arcs. But before they submerged, they turned for one final look at their attacker. Kufu stood proud in the morning sun, his chest heaving, spear ready. The mermaids' true forms revealed themselves then, their beautiful faces melting into scaled, twisted visages, their eyes becoming black pools that seemed to contain the ocean's darkest depths. What just happened? Kufu asked Nana quietly. But grief for the fallen women took precedence over answers. As they buried their dead, the weight of what they faced became clear. These weren't simply powerful beings, they were ancient horrors wearing beauty like a mask, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. That night, as the village mourned their losses, Kufu made a decision. He had seen the enemy now, had wounded them, had seen their true nature. If there was any hope of saving the men of Kayana, it lay in his ability to face these creatures again, this time, in their own domain. The oldest woman in Kayana approached Kufu before his descent, her wizened hands holding a pendant that seemed to pulse with its own light. "This will protect you," she whispered, placing it around his neck. The metal felt warm against his skin, somehow both comforting and alive. Standing at the ocean's edge, Khufu took one last look at the gathered women. Nana stepped forward, unable to contain herself, and embraced him passionately. Tears streamed down her face as she stepped back, joining the hundreds of women who had come to bid him farewell or perhaps goodbye. Drawing upon the skills his mother had taught him, Khufu took a deep breath and dove into the waters. Down he swam, deeper than he'd ever gone before, pushing the limits of even his extraordinary lung capacity. The sunlight above grew dimmer until darkness enveloped him completely. Just as his chest began to burn with the need for air, he spotted a peculiar spiraling current, like a funnel, in the water. Fighting against the crushing pressure, he let the current pull him in. The world spun, and suddenly he was falling through darkness until he plunged into new waters. When he surfaced silently as his mother had taught him, Khufu found himself in a realm of impossible beauty. Bioluminescent plants cast an ethereal glow over everything, illuminating crystal formations that stretched toward the ceiling he couldn't see. But the beauty was marred by the reality of what he witnessed. Men, hundreds of them, moved about like shadows of their former selves. Some tended to strange underwater gardens, others carried loads of shimmering stones, and still more worked at tasks Khufu couldn't comprehend. Their movements were mechanical, their eyes vacant. He swam to the shore and approached one of the men tending a garden. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. After Khufu explained his presence, tears filled the man's eyes. He spoke of how the mermaids had been slowly killing them, draining their life force for sustenance. Those who resisted were torn apart and devoured by the demon sisters. "Some have accepted their fate," the man explained, his voice hollow. "The mermaids, their beauty is beyond description. Their very presence makes your heart race, your mind cloud. Even knowing what they are, you can't help but want to please them." Looking up, Khufu saw 3 ornate structures rising from the underwater landscape. These were the private chambers of the mermaid sisters, where they indulged in their luxuries and tormented their captives. Each night, chosen men would be summoned to attend to them, returning as shells of themselves. As night approached in this timeless realm, Khufu watched men preparing themselves in a golden pool. They were being readied for the mermaid's pleasure. His hand gripped the pendant at his neck, feeling its warmth pulse stronger. He knew what he had to do: wait until the mermaids retired to their chambers, then strike. The rescue would begin with death, but if he succeeded, it would end in freedom. In the shadowy depths of the underwater kingdom, Khufu moved like a ghost toward the first chamber. His heart pounded against his chest as he approached the mermaid's private sanctuary, where she lay attended by 2 enslaved men. With silent precision honed by years of hunting in island waters, he signaled the men to step aside, their vacant eyes showing a flicker of understanding. The mermaid's beauty was devastating, more alluring up close than he could have imagined. She beckoned him closer, her smile promising pleasures beyond mortal understanding. But Khufu's hand clutched the pendant, its warmth anchoring him to reality. In one fluid motion, he struck, driving his dagger deep into her heart. She didn't even have time to scream. The second chamber proved more challenging. This mermaid sensed his presence the moment he entered, turning to face him with eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence. "So you have made your way here," she hissed, her beautiful face twisting with hatred. Khufu didn't waste breath on words. He attacked, their battle brief but fierce, ending when he managed to drive his dagger through her back as she tried to summon her magic. But it was the final chamber, the lair of the mermaid leader, that would test him to his limits. She stood waiting in the grand hall, her eyes blazing with fury and power. "You will pay for this insolence," she snarled, her voice carrying the weight of ancient depths. The battle that erupted shook the very foundations of the underwater kingdom. She attacked with waves of dark energy, her strikes swift and deadly. Khufu dodged and weaved, his years of swimming giving him an agility that kept him just ahead of her attacks. The pendant around his neck glowed brighter with each blow it deflected, its protective magic matching her dark power. Enslaved men watched from the shadows, their eyes showing the first signs of hope they'd felt in years. The combatants fought for what seemed like hours, the chamber around them trembling with the intensity of their clash. Khufu used every skill he possessed, every lesson his mother had taught him, every ounce of strength in his body. Finally, he managed to corner her against one of the crystal walls. The pendant suddenly pulsed with blinding light, causing her form to flicker between her beautiful facade and her true, monstrous nature. In that moment of vulnerability, Khufu struck with everything he had, driving his spear through her heart. Her scream echoed through the underwater kingdom, a sound of rage and disbelief that shook the very water around them. Then, like her sisters before her, she crumbled to ash, her remains drifting away in the current. Silence fell over the grand hall. Khufu stood there, breathing heavily, his pendant's glow slowly fading. The spell that had held the men in thrall began to break, awareness returning to their eyes. Looking at their hopeful faces, Khufu knew the hardest part was done. Now came the task of leading them home, back to the women who had waited so long for their return. "We are free," Khufu declared to the gathered men, his voice echoing through the underwater kingdom. Though weak and weary from years of enslavement, the men's eyes sparkled with renewed life as the last traces of the mermaid spell faded away. Like waking from a long nightmare, they began to remember their wives, their children, their homes above the waves. Khufu led them to the spiraling funnel that had brought him to their prison. "Take deep breaths," he instructed, drawing upon his mother's lessons. "The journey is short, but the current is strong." One by one they entered the swirling waters, their hearts pounding with the promise of freedom. The underwater current pulled them upward, through darkness and pressure, until finally they burst through the surface into blinding sunlight. The shores of Kayana Island lay before them, and there on the beach stood hundreds of women, their faces a mixture of hope and disbelief. For a moment, time stood still as husbands and wives stared across the water at each other, neither side daring to believe this moment was real. Then someone moved. A woman ran into the surf, screaming her husband's name. The spell broke and the beach erupted in chaos as families reunited. Men swam desperately towards shore while women waded out to meet them. Tears mixed with salt water as couples embraced for the first time in 7 years. Children who had been too young to remember their fathers were introduced by weeping mothers. Nana stood in the shallows, watching as her community knitted itself back together. When Khufu finally made his way to shore, she approached him with tears streaming down her face. "You have brought us hope and restored our family," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We are forever in your debt." The celebrations lasted for days. The island, which had known only women's voices for so long, now rang with the deeper tones of men's laughter. Children who had grown up in the shadow of loss now played in the surf without fear. Families shared meals together, making up for years of empty chairs at their tables. As for Khufu, he found himself surrounded by a community that treated him as more than a hero. They made him family. The skills that had kept him alive on his deserted island now helped him teach the younger generation how to fish and swim. The patience his mother had instilled in him made him a natural mediator as families worked through the challenges of reunion. One evening, as he sat watching the sunset with Nana, she turned to him with a gentle smile. "You know," she said, "when we found you on that raft, we thought the gods had sent us a miracle. We didn't know then what kind of miracle you would be." Khufu looked out over the village, at the restored families and healing hearts, and felt the last of his own loneliness fade away. On this island that had known such darkness, he had found what he'd been searching for since his mother's death, not just a place to live, but a true home and a family that would never let him drift away again.